G'day, I'm Gary. My wife Robbie and I live in Southern California. We're in USDA Zone 10A, Sunset Zone 23, and in this video I'm going to talk about how I'm going to plant my leeks this year. I've been growing leeks in my garden for 2 or 3 years now. I've had them planted in my wilderness area, the area that I harvest for the leaves for my bananas, and this year I'm going to grow them a little differently. I'm going to plant them in these tubs or barrels that I've cut down. By planting them in the barrels, I'll be able to find them a lot easier. I'll be able to water them and maintain them a lot better. The way I've had them set up the past couple of years, I've had pretty good results, but towards the end of the season, they do get lost. A lot of my alliums do get lost. So my onions and some of my other plants, I've moved out of my garden and into these barrels, and now I'm starting on the leeks. Now Robbie's had these leeks planted for about 7 weeks now. I brought some seeds up for her. She put them in her double planter system. There are some roots coming through the bottom. I'm not exactly sure if they're the leeks or whether they're papayas or celery or even lettuce. There's a few things growing in here. She purposely planted the papayas. The celery and the lettuce came up as volunteers. She's had this set up in a deck garden up at the house, and there's probably going to be other surprises that'll show up in this. Anyhow, the leeks are at 7 weeks old. They're just at the right stage where I can take them out and I'll be able to get a good root system. They won't be hard to remove. I'm going to use the back of the fork, and basically all I need to do is just go down the side, down to the bottom, and I'll kind of cut it all the way around. If they have any side roots, that's okay. It won't harm them too much, and it's just a matter of gently lifting them out. So right now their root system isn't that well developed, so all I have to do is separate them off, and they're easy to separate off at this point. So that's how big the roots are, and that's a good size to transplant. I've had a lot of success transplanting things at this size. So what I'll do now is I'll fill this barrel. This is empty right now. I'll fill it with the right amount of soil. I'm going to use the soil that I've got here. This is improved soil from my garden that I dug out of here. It's a mixture of clay and wood chips. So it's kind of nice and crumbly. It's a good consistency, and I consider it an improved soil to what our native soil is. So I'll put this soil, I'll start putting this in the bottom. Before I do that, I think I'll go around my garden. I'll show you some of the other alliums that we're growing, and I'll go over those, and I'll give you my opinion as to why I want to grow alliums. This year I'm going to grow my alliums, and onions and leeks, garlic in a different way. I've set up these half barrels that I cut down to size. I've got a few benefits by growing them in the barrels. I'm using the barrels, I'm strategically placing them so that I can use the barrels as hose guides. I've also found that if I plant things in the barrels, the insects can't climb up the sides, and I've got less pest pressure. Some of these onions I found in my garden and I transplanted them. Others I bought as transplants and sets. So I've got a lot of onions growing in my raised beds as well. I've got different types of onions here. I believe these are white onions that I dug up earlier in the year out of my garden when I was harvesting the greens. I've worked out that if I leave the onions in amongst my green leafy plants, the plants that I grow to chop and drop and put under my bananas, I end up losing some. I can't remember where they all are. Like these two here, I should have harvested earlier. I didn't notice them until I started clearing. And I've got a lot of seed that have started to germinate. So this onion plant here, I'm going to transplant. I'll just dig it out and transplant it into one of the barrels. When I go to harvest them from the barrels, I'll be able to find them. They're going to be easy to harvest and get to. I'll also be able to maintain the water better on them. So I've set these barrels up around the main area I'm going to grow my greens in. And what I'll do now, I'll go over and I'll show you how I'm going to plant the leeks. The leeks are going to be planted a little differently to the onions. To plant the leeks, I decided to plant some in this container here. What this is the top part of a barrel. I got a number of barrels that were used as yard waste barrels at someone's house. So I chopped them down. I cut them in half. Some of them have bottoms in them, and I can use those in places where I need to protect them from tree roots. In my garden, I don't really have a lot of tree roots to worry about, so I'm going to use this top from this barrel, and I'm going to grow the leeks in this one here. What I did first, I cleared some of the concrete blocks away. I sat it in the corner here, and I'm going to backfill it with soil. Now this soil here is nice and crumbly. It's got a lot of organic matter in it. Basically what it is the wood chips that I've sat on the top for the past 4 years have incorporated into the soil underneath. So it's very nice soil. So I'm not going to do anything special for the soil with the leeks. So I've just got a couple of buckets here. And all I'm going to do is just fill it up to maybe 6 inches deep. So it's going to be about that deep there. So now I've got the soil in. What I think I'll do now is I'll water this in to make sure it's nice and wet, and then I'll come back and I'll plant some of the leeks. So I filled this halfway up and I've watered it in. I've actually overwatered it. I'm going to plant them now. We haven't had rain for 6 months, and the other day we got about ½ an inch. We're expecting more rain Thanksgiving. It's November now. And if I get them in the ground a few days before it starts to rain, that will get them started, and the rain will make them take off. So this is a good time to plant them. Leeks grow different than onions. They grow kind of with their leaves clustered together and form a sheaf. And what you're trying to do when you're planting leeks, you want to hill it or cover the base of it, and that will keep them bleached. The main part people want is the white base of the plant. Some people discard the greens, but we eat the greens too. What I'm going to do is plant these down here, and as I watch them grow, I'm going to add sifted wood chips to cover the base of them, and that will keep the bottom part of the plant nice and white and bleached out. Onions grow as a bulb, so once they go dormant, if you leave them in the ground, they can rot. Leeks are a little bit more forgiving. They're good for a permaculture garden, at least in my opinion. You can leave them in the ground. They'll take 6 months for them to mature, but you can leave them in the ground and they don't have a tendency to rot like onions would if you left onions in the ground, which obviously I've done that. Anyhow, I'm just going to dig these out like I showed earlier. I'm just going to stick the back of the fork down and kind of go straight down to the plastic base. And all I have to do now is slide a clump of them out. Right now, the root system isn't that well developed, so I'm going to plant them straight in the ground the way they are. If the root system was a little further along, I would have to break them apart, and the way I would do that is maybe soak them in water and just sort of gently pry them apart. But the way they're growing right now, they've got about the same amount of roots as they have greens at the top. So I don't expect them to go into transplant shock. So I'm just going to, with my finger, push a little hole in and drop them in as individuals. It's just a matter of pushing them in and packing the soil around them. The soil they've been growing in is potting soil that came out of a bag. Robbie got a good deal on some potting soils, so she's growing them in potting soil. And these are very easy to separate at this stage. Normally you would plant them around 4 to 6 inches apart. I'm going to plant them a little closer. I'm going to pack them in pretty tightly here. I've got plenty to play with, so I'm not worried about it. As I stick the fork down, I can hear crunching of roots being cut. I'm not concerned about that. They have a good root structure. These are bunched together a little more. If I can take some of the potting soil with them, that will be helpful to the plant. I'm just going to plant them up. Once I get them planted up, I'll just get the camera out and I'll get a closer shot of what I've just done. If they were bigger, I would lay them on the side, but because they're small, they seem to be standing up pretty good. Some of them I'm planting, I'm not separating them, so I'll see which one grows the strongest and I'll thin them a little bit later on. The fibre in leeks are a good source of prebiotic fibre. Now that I've made a little bit of an opening, I can just go in with my fingers and drag them out pretty easily. Okay, so this is what they look like after I've planted them. I think I've got enough in this container. This one container probably won't handle any more than this. I've still got plenty left over, and we've got a lot of leeks. I don't know how many I've planted, but I'm going to plant in a few other places around my garden, and Robbie will plant some in her garden. They do look like they're pretty well packed together, but they're easy to separate at this stage. Even if they stay in here and they get a little taller, they'll still be able to be removed from her container. So this is her double container system. She's got a video on this, and this works really well. It catches the water underneath, and you can bring these indoors and you don't have to worry about creating a mess in the house. So the papayas and the celery and the lettuce, they may be planted elsewhere, but for now this is where my first lot of leeks are being planted. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Feel free to leave a comment if you feel like leaving a comment. And with that, thanks for watching, and don't forget to eat what you grow.